Imagine RPG Maker, but in 3D. And no, I am not talking about Unite. Definitely not talking about Unite. Because you see, there's this plugin that's been going around for actually several years, since the MV days, and it's called MZ3D, or MV3D if you're using the MV engine, and it's developed by TheOdie virus. Now, here's the deal. You have Unreal. You have Godot. Why in the world would you want to first buy RPG Maker and then buy MZ3D when you can essentially do all of that for free? So that's exactly what I'm here to do today. Sup dogs, name's TheOdie, and let's see if MZ3D can be worth it. So if you were to ask me what would make this a great plugin, it's really 3 boxes it really needs to check. First, player controls, graphical assets, and of course, the plugin compatibility. Now when I say player control, is it smooth? Is the camera intuitive? Or will the player actually find themselves fighting their keyboard very often just to adjust to these different mechanics? Well, interestingly enough, we can actually switch between keyboard and mouse mode. Mouse, as you may expect, controls the camera with your mouse. Keyboard, on the other hand, relies on 2 buttons to rotate the camera left and right, and then page up and page down for up and down. Kind of a weird button layout, but understandably, if you have your pitch the way you want it, then really you're not going to be adjusting it all that often. The mouse, as you expect, gives you the omnidirectional viewing, and after adjusting the plugin parameters to my preference, it's actually not so bad at all. Although one thing I did find kind of weird is that mouse sensitivity adjustment in the options does not really change the y-axis all that much, and it changes the x-axis a lot more. So while you're going a little bit slower in the x direction, you're kind of going all over the place in the y direction. I think there is an adjustment there, but it's not as strong as for the X. And in my opinion, if it's possible to separate those 2 sensitivities, that might be pretty good, whether it's in the plugin parameters or just in the option commands. Also, if you could just change this to a meter instead of having me to click and go through the series. That's probably a problem with RPG Maker, and it's probably a lot more work to do, but I don't know, I think that's kind of something a lot of players will want to see. Now, admittingly, walking in tight corners isn't the best, but it also isn't the best in any game. You get a bit of clipping, but it isn't awful. Here's a side-to-side comparison with Genshin Impact when traveling in tight corners. The only unfortunate thing is that I feel as though tight spaces exist more so in RPG Maker than any other normal 3D game, and I think it has a lot to do with the tile-like aspect to its map design and navigational system. And oddly enough, this made keyboard controls for camera controls feel pretty decent. I am even going to go as far as to say that it felt pretty fitting. Because you see, everything moves in one of 8 directions, and so the camera turning at 45-degree increments just makes a lot of sense. The real test though was when it came to mazes. It wasn't great. A lot of times I found myself bumping into walls with either mouse or keyboard controls. Keyboard found myself over rotating several times and even rotating in the wrong direction a few times, whereas the mouse controls just felt very busy. Looking at it kinda gave me a headache. It kinda came down to the fact that you're going to have to design your maps with more space in mind. Granted, that's probably how you would in general for a 3D game, but again, RPG Maker having that tile-like navigational system, and even how it just interacts with everything in tiles just makes it feel like these small spaces can exist and comfortably, more so than any other game maker out there. But hey, what you expect? Going from a 2D plane to a 3D plane? Of course you're going to have to start to think a little bit differently. Which, by the way, MZ3D can swap perspective while in game, and if there's anything at all that I wanted most from this plugin, it was that. It's an extremely niche want, but man, does it come with some very fun ideas. Also, don't use isometric. Trust me, do not use isometric. Because of the tile-like mechanic of RPG Maker, it makes interacting with events borderline painful. So next, let's talk about graphical assets. The main question here is, can you import 3D assets? Yeah. You're not gonna like it. I'm not a 3D artist, and so this clip is straight from Riku's tutorial, and I think you can see what I mean by you won't like it. The images are note functions, meaning that the graphics are blank, meaning that your map is filled with a bunch of blank tiles, meaning that in order for you to check for position and adjust accordingly, you're test playing every single time. See? You won't like it. And say you do add a graphic for each object you put in the game to act as a placeholder. Well, now you're doubling effort. And as an indie game developer, especially if you're solo, the one thing you don't have time is to double all of those efforts. So let's use the other method, what Qt Virus has intended in the first place, taking our 2D assets and turning them 3D. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's actually pretty good. Yes, it still doesn't look great on the map editor, but it's more coherent than a map filled with blank events. You don't have to double effort as I mentioned earlier, but the thing you may or may not like is the fact that you'll still be using a lot of call functions. And I know, looking at all of this is like nightmare fuel. But if you think about it, you're building this one step at a time. So of course you're just adding a line after a line after a line. And if you think of it that way, well, it's no more than first placing your grass, then your buildings, then your windows on the buildings. But anyway, I think you understand what I'm trying to get at. And as a matter of fact, let's take a look at one of those call functions. So let's take a look at an example. D10, we head on over to D, and here is 10 because it does start at 00, so this is 10. And the top is going to look like A320. So let's head on over to A, and let's check out where A3 starts. So A is all the roof and wall tiles. So it starts with this weird rainbow-y one to this ice-looking one. So from here all the way to here, and we get what again? A320. So 0, 1, 2, 20 is this right here. And then we got side A320, it's the exact same thing. So that must mean that for the roof tile, the sides of it will look like A320. And the height of it will be half a tile high. So let's go ahead and check that out by planting it right next to the player on start. And it looks exactly like it said it would. And just to prove that I am reading it correctly, so let's change the sides to A321. So instead it's going to look like this on the side, and this will remain as the top. And let's also change the height to 1. It is exactly as I expected. The roof on top, the wall on the side, and it is 1 tile high. And just like that, everything works out. Now, what about the objects that's just out in the field, like the pole? Bam! Terrain tags. Just from looking at these call functions, I can easily see the many hours and hard work and determination that Qt Virus has put into this system. Like, it is just incredible. The amount of quality of life and ease and just the efficiency to create maps, turning your 2D tiles into 3D. If there's anything that impresses me the most, it's these little things that screams efficiency and user optimization. I think we all saw that when I was using Unite back then. Oh, and by the way, you can even assign presets in the plugin parameters that acts globally so that you don't have to define a wall is say 2 tiles high every time. By the way, this plugin also comes with lighting, and alone you know that's gonna make it really good. Now comes the big question. Is it compatible with other plugins? And I'm particularly going to be looking at Visustella's just because Visustellar is widely used among many of the RPG Maker community. Just has such great quality of life stuff. Couldn't have said it better myself, as you say to yourself as you watch this. While of course I won't be testing all of Visustella's plugins, I will be testing several of their core scripts, and especially one I enjoy very much, horror effects. Let's start with the plugins, and as you can see here, Events Movement, as you could probably expect, didn't do so well. I'm not sure if it was something that I could have found and changed in the plugin parameters, but whenever I moved and rotated camera at the same time, it locked the player in different facing directions. Moving the character still worked, but it was kind of like their direction fix was turned on and then they started moving while still facing that direction. While it's not a huge loss, it's still a bit unfortunate because that means we're going to lose the labels and other small touches that came with the Events Movement core engine. As for the horror effects, it is niche, but hey, I am a horror game dev after all, so I actually enjoyed this plugin very much. It has some very cool effects. Now, the weird part is that anything that it would want or try to do to the events just didn't work, but anything to the screen did work. It's so weird. It makes sense in my head, but it's so weird. And changing the perspective back to 2D did not fix it at all. It was only when MZ3D was turned off that everything was working again. So bottom line, should you get MZ3D? You know, you're buying RPG Maker, then you're buying MZ3D and stapling it on top of RPG Maker. So it's like, why? You got Godot, you got Unreal Engine. If you're desperate enough, you got Unity. All of which that can do it for free, one of which that will allow you to continue to do it for free forever. MZ3D, developed by QtVirus. Unreal Engine, developed by a company. Godot, developed by a community as an open source engine. So what would want to point me in this direction as opposed to that direction? Well, I think I got it. MZ3D is still RPG Maker, so you have all the uniqueness that RPG Maker has. Creating a game without having to learn a single bit of computer programming language, but more so and more importantly, for that tile-like design I mentioned early on. In my opinion, it really creates its own environment and its own aesthetic. Kind of like back in the old school retro days when you're playing Pokemon Blue or Pokemon Red or any of the other RPG games that were on the handheld. If you like it and you see potential in it, then MZ3D adds that extra layer or the extra dimension. That third dimension to really expand the possibilities. And as I mentioned before, I actually really enjoy being able to swap perspective from 3D to 2D and even first person. And I think being able to do that so flawlessly and so easily without having to swap out your tiles or your graphics in any way is just absolutely incredible. It's very niche, but I think some very clever ideas can come out of it. And not gonna lie, I already got one stirring in the back of my head. So if you're interested in seeing what that may be, then hit the subscribe button. Can't promise that it will come out anytime soon, but it is something that will be coming out. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your opinion of MZ3D. Oh, and I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video, but this actually was not sponsored at all. So don't feel like it's coming from a place that's very biased. And if anything, I actually jumped into this pretty biased against it. But after using it and trying it out for myself, gotta say, Cutie Virus did a very good job at this. Alright, excited to make that game happen, but in the meantime, if you're interested in playing one of my other games, then do check out Caster's Trap. It's on Steam, and I think you'll like it. Alright, see you in the next one. Till then, later!